My daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye at the dinner table and said my mother didn't belong there. Not in those exact words. She was too polished for that. What she said was, "I just think it would have been more comfortable for everyone if she'd stayed home." My mother was 78 years old. She had taken 2 buses to get there. I want to tell you what I did next. But first, you need to understand who my mother is. Her name is Opal. Opal Jean. She was born in Macon, Georgia, the 5th of 8 children, to a woman who took in laundry and a man who laid railroad ties until his back gave out at 53. She moved to Columbus, Ohio when she was 19 with $40, a cardboard suitcase, and a letter of reference from her church pastor. She got a job cleaning offices downtown. Then she got a second job at a laundromat on Broad Street. She saved enough to put herself through 1 year of community college before she had to stop. She met my father at a church picnic, married him 6 months later, and raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom house on the east side that she and my father eventually paid off completely. No help from anybody. My mother irons her clothes before she leaves the house, every single time. She says looking presentable is a form of respect, for yourself and for whoever you're visiting. The day of my son's dinner party, she had on a pale blue blouse she'd had since the 90s, pressed perfectly, a navy skirt, and her good shoes. She'd had her hair done at the salon on Friday specifically for this occasion. She brought a sweet potato pie she'd started making the day before, from scratch. She doesn't do box mixes. My son Terrell is 34. He works in commercial real estate and does very well. I'm proud of him. I've always been proud of him. He got his drive from his grandmother, honestly, from watching Opal stretch $1, work without complaining, and show up for people no matter what. I used to tell him that when he was young. I think somewhere along the way he forgot. His wife, Gwendolyn, comes from a different kind of background. Her father is a cardiologist in Worthington. Her mother sits on the board of 2 non-profits. They summer somewhere in the Carolinas, and they use summer as a verb without a trace of self-consciousness. None of that is a crime. People come from where they come from. But there's a kind of person who mistakes having money for having worth, and Gwendolyn has always been, in my quiet estimation, that kind of person. I tried to be fair about it. When Terrell first brought her home, I said to myself, give her time. People grow into themselves. Maybe she's nervous. Maybe this isn't how she really is. I made those excuses for almost 4 years. The dinner was a Saturday in March. Terrell and Gwendolyn had just moved into their new house in Dublin. 5 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a kitchen that looked like it had never seen an actual meal cooked in it. They were having a small housewarming. Family and a few of their friends. I assumed my mother was invited. She's family. She's the matriarch. She is, as far as I'm concerned, the reason any of us have anything to stand on. I called Terrell on Thursday to confirm my mother's pickup time. She doesn't drive anymore, and I always take her to family gatherings. That's just what I do. There was a pause on the phone. A pause just long enough for me to feel something shift in my chest. He said, "Dad, actually, Gwendolyn thought it might be better if Grandma sat this one out. It's kind of a grown and fancy thing. You know how these evenings can go." I said, "I don't know what that means, son," he said. "Gwen's parents are coming. Some of her colleagues. It's just, Grandma can sometimes go off on her stories, and the setup is kind of formal. And," I said, "your grandmother is the reason you went to college without debt. I want you to remember that before you finish this sentence." He got quiet. I said, "I'll see you Saturday," and I hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't send a text. I sat in my recliner in the living room for a long time just looking at the wall. My wife passed 6 years ago. Lymphoma went fast. And in those 6 years I have learned to sit with things before I react. She used to say I came out of the womb ready to argue. She wasn't wrong. But I'm older now, and I've learned there's a kind of response that's louder than any argument you could make out loud. Saturday came. I got dressed. Not in my everyday clothes. I wore the charcoal suit I wore to my retirement dinner from the post office. 31 years carrying mail in Columbus, Ohio, in every kind of weather, and I retired with a pension and my dignity intact. I put on the tie my wife gave me for our 30th anniversary. Dark burgundy. She said it brought out the gray in my temples and made me look distinguished. I don't know about all that, but I wore it for her and I wear it still. Then I drove to my mother's house on the east side. She was ready before I even knocked. That's Opal. She'd been ready probably since noon. I could smell the sweet potato pie from the porch. She'd wrapped it in foil and set it by the door like it was waiting to be called on. She opened the door and looked at me in my suit and said, "Well, we must be going somewhere important," I said. "The most important place I know." She laughed at that. She has a laugh that takes up the whole room. Always has. In the car, she didn't ask me about the details. She doesn't do that. She trusts me. She talked about her neighbor's new dog and about a woman from her church who'd just turned 90, and about a recipe she'd seen on television that she thought was probably good but could use some adjusting. I just drove and listened and let her voice fill up the car the way it always has, the way it did when I was a boy in the back seat on Sunday mornings. We pulled up to the house. I could see through the front window that people were already inside. Candlelight, nice clothes, the kind of gathering that makes you feel like you need to whisper. I carried the sweet potato pie. My mother took my arm. When Terrell opened the door, his face went through about 5 different expressions in about 2 seconds. I watched him land somewhere between panic and something I hoped was shame. Gwendolyn was standing a few feet behind him in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. She smiled the way people smile when they're deciding how to manage a situation. "Oh," she said. "Opal, what a surprise." My mother said, "Hello, sweetheart. You have a beautiful home." And she meant it. That's the thing about Opal. She doesn't carry other people's ugliness around with her. She walks in clean. Gwendolyn's parents were there, seated at the far end of the living room with 2 other couples I didn't recognize. Her father glanced up once and went back to his conversation. I noticed. My mother didn't. We sat down. Someone took the pie to the kitchen. My mother struck up a conversation with the woman next to her. One of Gwendolyn's colleagues, a young woman named something I've already forgotten. And within 4 minutes they were laughing together about something. My mother does that. She has never met a room she couldn't find her way into, because she's genuinely curious about people. That's a thing money can't buy and status can't teach. Dinner was served. It was catered. Little plates with complicated things on them, the kind of food that looks like architecture. My mother ate with her fork and knife held correctly, because my grandmother taught her table manners before she taught her anything else, and she passed those same manners to me. I saw Gwendolyn watching her once, maybe looking for something to correct, and finding nothing. Things were going fine until after the main course. Gwendolyn's father, his name is Dr. Ashworth, and he uses the title socially in a way that tells you everything, was holding court at the head of the table. He'd made some comment about the neighborhood, about property values, about how certain areas of Columbus were really coming back. That kind of talk. Then he looked down the table and said, pleasantly enough, "And where did you say you were from, Opal?" My mother said, "The East Side, born and raised." Dr. Ashworth smiled in that thin way. "Ah, the East Side." He looked at his wife. "That's really character. That these old neighborhoods still have people who've stayed." It sounded like a compliment, it wasn't. I set down my fork. My mother just nodded and said, "I raised 3 children there. My son bought me that house and I paid it off myself. 41 years I've lived on that block. I know every family, every tree. My church is 2 streets over. My husband is buried half a mile away." She paused and folded her hands in her lap. "I wouldn't trade it for any neighborhood in this city." Quiet around the table. Dr. Ashworth opened his mouth and then apparently decided there was nothing worth adding. I looked at my son. He was looking at the table. Gwendolyn was looking at her water glass. I said, quiet but clear enough for the table. My mother cleaned offices in this city for 22 years before she moved to the laundromat. Then she worked the laundromat until she was 60. Never missed a day of work that I can remember. Never asked anyone for a single thing she hadn't earned. The sweet potato pie in your kitchen is made from a recipe that's been in our family for 4 generations. I stopped. Let that sit. Then I said, my son inherited his work ethic from her. I just want to make sure everyone at this table knows that. Gwendolyn said, of course, we all. I said, I'm not finished. I don't raise my voice. I never have. My father didn't either. There's a kind of stillness that comes when you get older and you've done enough living that you're not afraid of a quiet room. I looked at my son and I said, I taught you to stand up for the people who stood up for you first. That lesson is still available to you. Terrell looked up. His jaw was tight. I could see him deciding something. He said, Grandma. He cleared his throat. I want to say something. He looked at Gwendolyn first. Not for permission, I realized, but as a kind of notice. Then he looked at my mother. I should have called you myself about this dinner. I should have made sure you knew how much we wanted you here. I'm sorry I let anyone make you feel otherwise. My mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Baby, I never felt otherwise. I knew you wanted me here. She reached over and patted his hand. Just like that. 60 years of dignity right there in that small gesture. Gwendolyn was silent for the rest of dinner. Her father made polite conversation about nothing for a while and then excused himself early. The other guests drifted out. Someone brought the pie out from the kitchen and set it on the table, and 2 of Gwendolyn's colleagues had second slices and asked my mother for the recipe. I helped my mother with her coat at the end of the night. At the door, Gwendolyn said to her, Thank you for coming, Opal. Really. My mother took her hand and said, Thank you for having me. This is a beautiful home. You fill it with love and it'll stay beautiful. In the car on the way home, my mother was quiet for a few minutes. Then she said, You didn't have to do all that, you know. I said, Yes, I did. She said, I can handle myself. I said, I know you can. I wanted you to see that you didn't have to. She reached over and squeezed my hand the way she used to when I was 5 years old and scared of something in the dark. Same grip, same warmth, she said. Your father would have done the same thing. That was the best thing anyone has said to me in 6 years. In the weeks after, Terrell called more than he had in months. He didn't explain himself or apologize again, he just called. Asked about my knee, which has been giving me trouble. Asked if I needed anything from the store. He drove out to his grandmother's house on a Sunday and fixed her screen door, which had been loose since last October. He sat with her for 2 hours in the kitchen while she told him stories he'd probably heard before, and he listened like they were new. I don't know what went on between him and Gwendolyn in their house. That's their business. What I know is that my son came back to himself in some way that mattered, and I think he knows now what he almost let go of. Last month, my mother turned 79. Terrell planned a birthday dinner himself, asked her what she wanted, drove to pick her up, brought flowers. He made a reservation at a place downtown she'd mentioned once, 2 years ago in passing. He'd remembered. They were seated at a round table in the corner, and my mother wore her good blue blouse again. And she looked like the most important person in the room, which she was. She called me that night when she got home. She said, That boy of yours remembered. I said, He gets that from you. She laughed, that laugh that fills a whole room, even over the phone, even at 79 years old. I've been a mailman and a father and a widower and an old man in a recliner who's learned to sit with things before he reacts. I'm not a philosopher, but here is what I know. The people who loved you before the world knew your name deserved to be in every room you enter. Not because they're perfect, because they're the reason you know how to stand. That sweet potato pie, by the way, was completely gone by the end of the night. Dr. Ashworth had 2 slices. I noticed that too.